Brazil, the heart of South America, is a land of vast forests and golden beaches, where European, African and indigenous cultures converge in a vibrant tapestry of history, music and celebration. Its history is marked by both conflict and prosperity, and today it is a multi-ethnic nation and one of the world's leading democracies. Welcome to this new video in our series on the history of South American countries. In the late 15th century, Portugal was at the height of its maritime ambitions. With direct support from the Crown and taking advantage of the development of the light and fast caravel, voyages set sail along the African coast in search of gold, slaves and, above all, a direct sea route to the riches of the East. Meanwhile, Spain was taking a different path, heading west across the Atlantic. To avoid a clash between the two powers, the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed, dividing the unknown world with an imaginary line and granting each side its share of the New World. In 1497, Vasco da Gama achieved a historic feat by reaching India via the Cape of Good Hope, opening a trade route that transformed the global economy. 2 years later, a stroke of luck, or perhaps the winds and ocean currents, led Pedro Álvares Cabral's fleet to the shores of a vast landmass east of the Tordesillas line, Brazil. There, the Portuguese encountered diverse human cultures, most notably the Tupi-Guarani people, who lived by farming and hunting in lifestyles adapted to the forests and rivers. At first, this land didn't seem like a golden treasure like those found in Mexico or Peru, but what attracted attention was Brazil's deep red wood, used in the production of European dyes. Coastal trading posts known as Vitória were quickly established, where this wood was exchanged for European goods and tools. With growing ambition, Portugal moved from transient trade to organized colonization, dividing the land into fiefdoms, donatarios, granted to nobles and investors. The greatest focus was on the region of Pernambuco, thanks to its climate being ideal for growing sugarcane, the most valuable commodity in Europe at the time. The year 1549 marked a major turning point as the province of Brazil was officially declared, and its capital, Salvador, was established as the center of administration and government. This was accompanied by the arrival of Jesuit missionaries who sought to convert the indigenous population and organize them into religious communities. However, European contact brought with it an unseen catastrophe. European epidemics decimated millions of indigenous people, causing a demographic collapse that forever altered the face of the country. Meanwhile, French attempts to penetrate the southeast failed before the Portuguese established their presence with the founding of Rio de Janeiro. The booming sugar industry transformed Brazil into a vast agricultural production factory, but it also created an insatiable demand for labor. With the decline in the indigenous population, Portugal resorted to the massive importation of slaves from Africa, creating one of the largest slavery systems in modern history. Between 1580 and 1640, Portugal entered a precarious period when it was subject to the Spanish crown in what became known as the Iberian Confederation, making its colonies an open target for Spain's enemies. The Dutch seized the opportunity, taking control of parts of northern Brazil and establishing what became known as Dutch Brazil in Pernambuco, developing a modern sugar industry. But the tide turned again. After Portugal regained its independence, a long campaign culminated in the final expulsion of the Dutch in 1654. By then, Brazil had become the world's largest sugar producer, but this glory was short-lived. Competition from Caribbean plantations soon intensified, prices plummeted, and the Brazilian economy began to seek new paths. Thus, from discovery to colonization, from sugar to transformation, Brazil began to shape a long history of wealth, exploitation, and conflict. Towards the end of the 17th century, Brazil's destiny was turned upside down with the discovery of gold and later diamonds deep in the interior, particularly in Minas Gerais. Waves of settlers, adventurers and slaves surged inland, and thriving mining towns sprang up among the mountains and forests. Mineral wealth became the lifeblood of the Portuguese Empire. Caravans transported gold to Rio de Janeiro, from where fleets sailed to Lisbon under heavy guard. This massive influx of wealth did not go unnoticed by European powers. During the War of the Spanish Succession, Rio was subjected to a daring French attack, during which the city was sacked before being ransomed with treasures of gold, a scene that exposed the fragility of colonial defences. By 1763, with mining at its peak, the centre of political and economic gravity shifted south, and Rio de Janeiro became the capital of the colony, replacing Salvador. At the same time, the economy was no longer solely dependent on sugar. It gradually diversified to include cotton and later coffee, which would become the backbone of the economy. This shift coincided with growing trade ties with the United Kingdom, which saw Brazil as a market and a strategic resource as it embarked on its industrial revolution. At the dawn of the 19th century, Europe was rocked by great upheavals when Napoleon Bonaparte's armies swept across the Iberian Peninsula. Portugal, under threat, opted for a rare historical precedent. The royal court fled across the Atlantic to Brazil, transforming a colony into an imperial capital. This opened the ports to global trade, strengthened the British alliance, and granted Brazil unprecedented institutions and de facto sovereignty. In 1815, its status was formally elevated to a kingdom united with Portugal, but liberal pressures in Lisbon forced the king to return, leaving his son as regent. When Portugal attempted to restore Brazil to its colonial status, the response was decisive. On September 7, 1822, Prince Pedro declared the independence of the Empire of Brazil, giving birth to a unique, independent monarchy in the Americas, which would gain international recognition a few years later. Economically, reliance on coffee cultivation increased in the 19th century, particularly in the southeast, enriching the agricultural elite and solidifying the system of large plantations. To meet the growing demand for labour, the importation of slaves from Africa continued despite international bans, until the trade was officially halted in 1850, after millions of enslaved people had entered the country. Regionally, Brazil sought to solidify its borders and influence. In 1828, it recognized Uruguay as a buffer state, and in the 1860s it engaged in a devastating war against Paraguay that shifted the balance of power in South America. Finally, in 1888, Brazil took the historic step of abolishing slavery, becoming the last country in the Americas to do so. However, legal freedom did not mean the end of suffering. Many freed slaves found themselves landless and without protection, working for meagre wages in a social system still burdened by centuries of exploitation. Thus, Brazil entered the modern era burdened with immense wealth and deeper contradictions. Following the abolition of slavery, hundreds of thousands of freed slaves migrated to working-class neighbourhoods in major cities in search of work, only to face poverty and marginalization. Landowners, meanwhile, resented the loss of free labour, deepening the divide between the agrarian elite and the state. As political discord intensified and the legitimacy of the imperial regime eroded, a military coup overthrew the emperor on November 15, 1889, establishing a republic with Manuel Deodoro da Fonseca as its first president. Economically, the economy remained almost entirely dependent on export-oriented agriculture, primarily coffee, which accounted for more than half of the country's exports, making it highly vulnerable to fluctuations in the global market. Simultaneously, rubber production expanded deep into the Amazon, drawing waves of workers to remote and dangerous areas. In the southeast, São Paulo emerged as the new economic hub, attracting large numbers of immigrants from Europe, the Middle East and Japan, and contributing to the rise of a burgeoning industrial and commercial class. Rio de Janeiro underwent a European-style urban modernization that included the construction of new streets and the demolition of old neighborhoods. However, this also led to the displacement of the poor to the foothills, where the first slums were formed. Diplomatically, the Rio Branco Baron played a pivotal role in establishing the borders of the modern state. At the beginning of the 20th century, he successfully expanded the country's territory and consolidated its sovereignty through negotiations and peaceful agreements with neighboring states, thus strengthening Brazil's regional standing without resorting to major wars. But this path was not without its crises. The economy suffered a severe blow with the rise of competition from Asian rubber, organized by colonial powers. Then came the greater catastrophe of the 1929 Wall Street crash, which triggered a global depression and a sharp drop in coffee prices. As the political crisis deepened, disagreements erupted among the ruling elites, and in 1930 the ensuing chaos paved the way for Getúlio Vargas to seize power through a coup. Vargas combined severe repression of his opponents with the launch of radical reforms to modernize the state, ending what was known as the Republic of Coffee, and launching a new phase of industrialization and the building of a multi-ethnic national identity, manifested in prominent symbols and achievements such as the inauguration of the Quaker Mr. Connovitais the Redeemer statue, the expansion of voting rights, and the laying of the first foundations for the aviation and oil exploitation sectors. During World War II, Brazil faced significant naval and economic challenges. German U-boats targeted its merchant ships, forcing the country to declare war on Germany and Italy in 1942. In response, approximately 25,000 Brazilian soldiers were sent to fight on the Italian front, while another 55,000 were deployed to the Amazon to harvest rubber for the Allies as part of the international war effort. This participation enhanced Brazil's international standing and demonstrated its capacity to contribute to global conflicts. After the war, with the onset of the Cold War, Brazil forged closer political and economic ties with the United States, seeking strategic support and protection against regional tensions. In 1960, President Kubitschek initiated a project to relocate the capital to the country's interior, founding Brasília as a modern administrative center symbolizing development and inland expansion, and alleviating the pressure on the overcrowded coastal areas. In the 1960s, João Goulart assumed the presidency and launched a series of educational reforms to combat illiteracy, along with fiscal and agricultural policies aimed at land redistribution and taxing multinational corporations. These measures alarmed the United States, which supported a military coup that brought Castelo Branco to power, establishing a decades-long military dictatorship. During this period, the economy opened up to foreign investment and urban and agricultural development expanded. But this also led to significant environmental degradation, particularly in the Amazon rainforest, with the construction of the Trans-Amazonian Highway and the expansion of soybean plantations in the south. In the 1980s, Brazil began a peaceful transition to democracy, with elections in 1985 and the adoption of the 1988 Constitution, which extended voting rights to illiterate citizens and recognized the nation's ethnic and cultural diversity, laying the foundation for a modern, secular state. Despite this, the economy faced significant challenges. The country experienced high inflation, and the currency changed several times before the real was officially adopted in 1994. A free trade agreement was also signed with Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay to promote regional economic integration. At the beginning of the 21st century, Lula became president from the Workers' Party. He launched comprehensive social programs to eradicate poverty and improve infrastructure in favelas, lifting approximately 20 million Brazilians out of poverty. This was followed by the presidency of Dilma Rousseff, who faced economic pressures and corruption allegations, leading to her impeachment in 2016. Jair Bolsonaro then assumed power, maintaining hardline policies and a nostalgia for the military dictatorship, until Lula won a third term in 2022. Today, Brazil is a multi-ethnic and multicultural nation, born from waves of European immigration, the enslavement of Africans and indigenous populations. It is one of the world's leading democracies, with a history deeply intertwined with global events, the exploitation of natural resources and ongoing economic and social transformations. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.